This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. You're hearing the national anthem in Navajo from singer-songwriter Michelle Thomas. She'll perform this again at the annual Veterans Powwow hosted by the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center. There are over 150,000 veterans who identify as American Indian or Alaska Native, and more than 14,000 active duty service members who identify as American Indian, according to reports from the Federal Departments of Veteran Affairs and Defense. This hour on Where We Live, we celebrate our Native American veterans. We'll explore why we serve, a National Institute of the American Indian exhibit. But first, Eastern Pequot Tribal Councilor and U.S. Army veteran Valerie Gambrell joins us. Welcome to Where We Live, Councilor Gambrell.
Hello.
And our listeners can join in on this call to 888-720-9677 or 888-720-WNPR. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Councilor Gambrell, I just want to ask you, you were in the U.S. Army intelligence field for 4 years and received the rank of sergeant. What made you serve?
Well, what really made me serve is once I graduated from school, I wanted to move away from Norwich, and I knew I wouldn't just do that. And I had, my family members that served in the Army, so that's originally why I picked to go into the Army.
Where'd you train?
Fort McClellan, Alabama.
And then where were you deployed?
I went to school in Pensacola, Florida, and my first duty station was San Antonio, Texas, and then I went to Okinawa, and I had a temporary duty station in Korea.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your service when you were in Okinawa and I guess the temporary duty station in Korea? Sorry.
Yep. Well, I really loved Okinawa a lot. It's a very small island with a lot of military on it. In Korea, I went to NCO school for 3 months in Korea.
And what'd you do as a sergeant? I understand it's the field of intelligence. Can you just tell me a little bit more about your service there?
What I essentially did was I copied radio signals and Morse code.
Coming up, we're gonna hear from the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian about their exhibit and book. It's called Why We Serve Native Americans in the United States Armed Forces. You were one of the first people, as I understand it, to step foot in that museum during the opening ceremony in 2004. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, we actually took a bus with tribal members, and we actually marched with our honor guard. It was amazing to see so many Native Americans come together and just, march down. It really was a sight to see, and it was an honor to be the first ones to be allowed into the museum. Actually, our picture hangs in the museum.
Is that a point of pride for you, having that picture in there?
Definitely, yes.
You tell me a little bit about the trip down there. Did you take the family to go down there?
Actually, we took a bus. We took tribal members. There was elders, youth, everybody. We rode down on a bus. We stayed in a hotel for a couple days. We were able to take the kids to go see the different monuments, and the museum itself was just so amazing for the kids. It's something that I'll never forget, and I'm sure that they'll never forget. I mean, we've lost a great many elders since then, but it really was a sense of pride for our tribe.
You feel like the kids and maybe any family that didn't serve, do you think that they kind of felt what you were feeling there? Do you think they had that same kind of experience?
Definitely. I mean, I know for definitely my kids, I talked a lot about, my experiences. And like I said, I had, family members that also served in the military, especially the Army. We all served in the Army, except I had one cousin that went into the museum. I had, my great grandfather served in World War One. My uncle served in World War Two, and I had another uncle that served in Korea. So there was a lot of military.
One of your uncles won a Purple Heart, right?
Yes, he did. He was actually in Korea. He said that they were out in the field, and there was a young kid that was scared. And when the shooting started, he actually covered this young man with his body, and he ended up getting shot.
So that's a powerful story. I read a little bit in a pre-interview about your great grandfather and his service in World War One. What can you tell me about what he encountered as he served?
Actually, back in those that time, everybody was colored or they weren't. So he served in the colored regiment, and he ended up dying. He was back in those days you didn't have PTSD or it wasn't called that, but at that time one of my uncles was lost. He was MIA, and it drove him over the top, and he ended up dying in a mental institution.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over the place, but you had two uncles, so that would have been two sons that your grandfather had, right? One was in
Correct.
Italy in World War II, and the other one was in Korea right afterwards?
Correct.
So this is
Yes.
so I'm trying to just get into your grandfather's mind here with all that he's dealing with, losing essentially one kid and then having another kid get shot. You feel like he kind of felt the responsibility there? Is that kind of what he was going through, you think?
Well, I think that because he himself was there, so he knew what they were going through. Like the rest of us wouldn't, but he knew exactly what they were going through. So I think that in itself, and he knew how the military was back then, really segregated. And I think he worried a lot that nobody had their back.
Yeah, you're
so
talking.
I think that played a big part.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you there. Finish up. I apologize.
No, that's okay.
You're talking.
No, I think that. Go ahead.
Sorry, you could finish your thought. I apologize.
No, that's okay. Go ahead. I think we're both.
Yeah. So you're talking about the segregation of the military at that point, and it being so segregated at that point in World War I as well, and then continuing on, I would imagine, through Korea at that point. So could you just help me out with understanding why somebody would want to serve in that kind of a segregated military service branch, and then I guess secondarily, considering the fact that Natives have been treated so bad by the country, why they would want to serve. Could you just kind of go through that, I guess, complicated array of reasons why Native Americans would want to serve in the U.S. military?
Well, I think for me, this is our country. This was ours first. This is always going to be ours. And so we defend what is ours. That's how I feel. And I think that's how they felt at that time, that this is our country regardless. I mean, that's the same way with the African Americans that served, how bad they were treated and how bad they were treated when they came back and how bad they're treated continuously. But you still have Native Americans that will go into the military and that'll do their duty and serve because this is our country. Regardless to what anybody wants to recognize it is.
The kind of discrimination that your grandfather faced, maybe your uncles, did that kind of prepare you for the service? How did that I guess shape your mind as you entered service?
I knew because I grew up in the 60s, so I know how it was, and I knew how it was going into the military. And yes, I did do some fight back, but you can only do so much. But that's not going to stop me from defending what's mine.
You're saying you felt discrimination as well. You faced it.
Definitely. Yes.
I'm sorry to hear that. Would you be comfortable sharing any of your experiences with discrimination?
Just the way that, the Army wants you to think that someone that grew up in Mississippi and was part of the Ku Klux Klan, and they put on a green uniform, and all of a sudden that racist is gone. It's not. It's there when you're going for promotions. It's there when you're going for jobs. And as a female, it's double, because you still have that good old boys club that don't feel that we belong there.
I'm glad you mentioned women in service. So we talk about your family. We talk about discrimination. We talk about women serving. With it being so close to Veterans Day and why we had you on here today, why is it so important that we honor Native American veterans, particularly at this time?
For me, once again, because despite the fact that the way this country treats Native Americans, we still serve. We still go out there and we still put our life on the line for this country, for our country, that don't treat us like we should be treated.
I do understand that the Mashantucket Pequots are honoring you at a powwow this Saturday. It's your first time being honored, right?
Yes. And it's an honor.
Do you know what you're going to anticipate feeling in that moment?
You always feel that sense of pride. You always feel that sense of pride because you went through a lot. I mean, I went through a lot. I know every member that goes into the military goes through a lot. And you go through a lot and you deal with a lot, and then you come back here and you still go through a lot and still deal with a lot. That's just our life.
You think you're going to feel your uncles and your grandfather when you're there getting the honor?
Definitely. I mean, my uncle's going to be honored, and unfortunately, he's not going to be able to be there. He's 93, and he's failing, but he can still tell those stories. He'll still tell you some of the stories, and some of them are very heartbreaking. But he would do it again. If you ask him, he'll say he'll do it again.
My best to your family, Councilor Gambrell. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
And there are at least 2 events honoring Native veterans in our state this weekend. The Institute for American Indian Studies in Washington, Connecticut will hold an annual Native Veterans Ceremony this Sunday at noon, honoring 2 Native veterans. And the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center, as we just talked about, will hold an annual Veterans Powwow this Saturday, where Councilor Gambrell will be honored. More details and the links to register are on our website at ctpublic.org/where we live. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Where We Live. I'm Frankie Graziano. You can join the conversation, 888-720-9677. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We're spending the hour honoring the important and complex legacy of Native American veterans. Recently, the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian set out to address the complicated question of, quote, why we serve. The museum put together a book and exhibit to explore what turned out to be the many answers to that question. Here to discuss the important legacy of Native servicemen and women is Alexandra Harris, senior editor of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian and co-author of Why We Serve, Native Americans in the United States Armed Forces. Welcome to Where We Live, Alexandra.
Good morning, Frankie.
I just want to remind people listening to us that you could join in on the conversation with Alexandra and I, 888-720-9677. Find us on Facebook and Twitter as well at Where We Live. Alexandra, can you just tell me about the inception of the National Museum of the American Indian and its opening in 2004?
Sure. The congressional legislation that created the museum was signed in 1989. And there are 3 locations for our museum. In 1994, the museum in Lower Manhattan in New York City opened with our core collection that came from an individual, George Gustav High. And then 5 years later, our Collections Resources Center in Suitland, Maryland opened. And then in 2004, our museum on the National Mall opened. And as you heard, we had thousands of Native people gathering and processing for opening of our museum.
16 narratives, something like that in the museum?
Right now, we have about 6 exhibitions open on a huge array of topics.
Gotcha,
so we're a unique museum. We feature history, culture, art, contemporary art, traditional arts. It runs the gamut of all, reflecting the diversity of Native cultures.
And then, as I understand it, the National Native American Veterans Memorial opened in 2020. I think this was part of a federal act to recognize and raise awareness of the service of Native Americans in the U.S. Armed Forces. Can you get us from the museum to the opening of the memorial and why it was important to honor Native American service members in this way?
Sure. The congressional legislation to found the memorial has been around for a while, but in 2013, it came to our museum in an amendment, and we were tasked to fundraise and create space on our grounds for the memorial. And so we take very seriously the values that we hear from Indian country. So we set out to hold meetings in, I think it was 35 different listening sessions in all across the United States, Alaska, and Hawaii, and listening to Native veterans and their families on what they wanted to see reflected in this memorial. We held a juried design competition to select, who ultimately selected Harvey Pratt, who is a Cheyenne and Arapaho tribal member, but also a Vietnam veteran, as the designer of the memorial. Native service and service to one's own people in general, I think, is more the focus, and a devotion and service to your homeland, just like what Councilor Gambrell was indicating, is so strong and universal in Indigenous cultures, and that reflects in military service.
Yeah, you're not kidding when you talk about it being set forth essentially a long time ago by the U.S. Congress. I think it was 1994, the National American Veterans Memorial Establishment Act and the Museum of the American Indian, probably around the same time, right? So it's about...
That's correct.
Yeah, 30-something years at that point. Just before we get to the book and the exhibit, Why We Serve, can you just explain a little bit about the long history of Native American veterans and why the question of why we serve, I guess, is a complicated one to answer?
Sure. And I think Councilor Gambrell really hit the nail on the head when she said that we still serve despite the treatment that Native people have gone through over the last, 500 years of history on this continent with colonialism. And you find that Native people were some of the first allies in, starting in the 1600s with European colonists, because the colonists realized they couldn't survive really in this new land of theirs, without allying with the people who knew it best. And of course, that was to the detriment of their enemies, which were often hereditary enemies of the tribe they allied with. So this started as small, localized alliances that Native nations made to try to secure their own sovereignty. And this is a story that changes, but not all that much. Throughout the Revolutionary War, 1812, Civil War, you still see Native nations trying to ally with different sides of combat to secure sovereignty in their homelands, and that doesn't always or often end up very well for them. So the reasons of why Native people have served differ from individuals to families to to nations, depending on the time period and circumstances. But, what we found talking to veterans is that Native veterans serve for all the reasons everybody else does, to get an education, to get out of, a bad situation, or to see the world. But there's an extra layer that is uniquely Indigenous, that is rooted in defending their own homelands. One veteran told us, "This is our land. No, we don't want it taken from us. And if we don't fight for it, who will?" So there's a deep commitment to their homelands, but also, I was talking to a young Lakota researcher who's working on the military history of his own tribe. And I asked him, your word for warrior, does it translate well into English? He said, no, it really means more like service of our own people. And if that means laying down your life in the process, then that's what you do. But you're protecting your community, you're serving your community. And that's why we see a lot of Native veterans have come home over the centuries and become leaders and activists for their rights and their sovereignty.
I really want to get into more stories and kind of some of the narratives behind the folks featured in the museum, and obviously some of the work that you've done. I just want to kind of get an idea for when you're approaching this question, what the mission and methodology is to actually execute.
Well, that's a really good question. I think listening is part of the mission of our museum is to work in partnership with Native peoples. So for me, not having a background in military history specifically, I need to do a lot more listening than maybe somebody who had, been researching. I used to be a museum curator for a tribe in California, and I worked on a veterans exhibition with them. And so I felt I had a good handle on what at least that tribe's, relationship with war and combat was. But every single tribe, and we're talking more than 550 tribes in the United States, has a different relationship and custom to war. And, part of my learning process was that not all tribes have a warrior tradition. Definitely the Great Plains tribes, there's, military societies in tribes like the Kiowa. But then you have tribes in California who are generally peaceful, and they didn't have that warrior tradition. Or you have tribes like the Hopi people, and we listen to Hopi people say, we don't have any tradition of war. Our worldview is about peace. So we wanted to demonstrate the diversity of that approach. And so instead of organizing our project or book or exhibition around a war starting in the colonial period, I wanted to go pre-European contact and see, tell me what your traditions were about preparing for war. What was war like in this country? And we learned that it was a very different style. There's a historian, Tom Holm, who calls it ritual warfare. The style of warfare in this country prior to Europeans was small skirmishes, sometimes just for status or resources. There wasn't the large scale, the goal of killing your enemy outright. That was a purely European style of war. And so there was a huge culture clash that happened when Europeans came and brought a very different style of war here. So we had to do a lot of listening, looking at a lot of new histories, especially ones written by Native people. What kind of themes do we see? So Mark Hirsch, my co-author, and I started seeing some really clear themes that originated in colonial times, but still exist today. Mainly stereotypes about Native people. And some of these could be called good stereotypes, like that of a super warrior. This myth that Native people have some innate talent in war that's inborn rather than learned, right? So that has affected real people and still continues to do so, where commanding officers will have this perception that Native people have a greater talent at war, so they're put in more dangerous positions. So we see this happening in the Civil War. We see this happening in contemporary wars. So it's a lot of listening, a lot of being open to changing your idea of how history has been constructed around combat and battles.
Yeah, do you think that listening is what really helps you, I guess, trying to challenge and explore deeply held assumptions about Native Americans and military service?
I do. I think there's a value called cultural humility, and it's about approaching people and communities, not assuming that I don't assume that I know more than they do. Right. So I want to make sure that I understand things from their perspective. An educator from the Tohono O'odham, which is in southern Arizona, he was talking to me about their traditions regarding warfare and how if someone is killed, the person who killed them has an obligation to that family to complete that life that they cut short. So you have and that's common in tribes like Southern California, Kumeyaay, and related peoples in the Southwest. Having an obligation of empathy towards the person who is your enemy is such a different value than our contemporary society, right? So I want to be able to give an authentic idea of what these diverse experiences are and customs are in communities, because so much of what's been written before about Native Americans and there's deep scholarship has been done that's really fantastic, but it often removes the idea that there are actual people and individuals with stories out there, and there's also a tendency to glorify war. And so we intentionally didn't use the word heroes. We tried to stay away from phrases like warrior spirit so that we could provide some authenticity in our work.
I believe it was you that wrote that many were drafted and wound up in uniform because Uncle Sam required them to do so. Can we start to get into the, I guess, very complicated answers to that question of why we serve and several different examples, if you don't mind?
Sure, absolutely. I think the draft is a really interesting concept and application to Native people. And I think it starts being an issue for the federal government in World War I. So Native people actually wanted to serve in World War I, but about a third were not citizens yet. So when they approached draft boards, the draft boards didn't quite know what to do. And some Native people went to Canada to serve instead. But the federal government said, okay, we can work this out legally. We'll accept them in. But draft boards had a difficult time sort of categorizing Native people. They didn't have the sort of demographic organization, measurements like they do today. And oftentimes, Councilor Gambrell indicated this, if you had brown skin, you might go into a segregated unit, particularly in the South. And that's true through World War II. A lot of Native people in the South were assigned to segregated units.
Thank you for clearing that up, too, because I was talking to her about her family in Korea, and it's important to get that kind of perspective as well.
Absolutely.
The Korean War obviously happening after World War II, for those that are uninitiated. Sorry, I get so into these history conversations. I apologize. You keep going. Thank you so much, Alexandra.
Sure, and stop me if I'm geeking out too much. I could talk for hours about this.
No, you keep going.
But, I think listening to Vietnam veterans is where the draft and the choice to serve was really taken away in a very significant number for a significant number of people. The hereditary participation in the military, it was very accepted for everyone to be in Native communities to be participating in the military. But the quantity of tours, there's a story about, oh my goodness, the Pula family in Anadarko, Oklahoma, or Kiowa, and the Pascal Cletus Pula, he was known to be the most decorated American Indian soldier in history. He served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, died in Vietnam. He earned 42 medals and citations during the 3 wars. And he attempted to prevent his own son from going to Vietnam. He enlisted in Vietnam, at the same time trying to, with the understanding that 2 people from the same family couldn't be in the same theater of war. Well, they went anyway, and he was killed. His son did survive at that time. But, you hear these stories. One of our jury members, who's Native Hawaiian, told me that his grandfather, who raised him, was a World War II veteran. And the man, Kavika, the McCaig, who spoke to me, he says, I was going to enlist with the expectation that this is just what we do. And he said, but my grandfather said, don't. I went so you don't have to. So I think there's still a lot of different attitudes based on what their experiences were. Again, as Councilor Gambrell mentioned, the PTSD and the effects of war.
And with us running up against the end of the time here in the interview,
sure,
I just want to get into
absolutely.
this part briefly because this is so profound. This question of why we serve, did you find that it could be unanswerable?
It is unanswerable. It's not that it's unanswerable. There's just 1,000 answers, right? So it's many layered and complicated. And I think that's really why we didn't try to answer it with one monolithic, answer. It's not simple. And I think the whole point of our book is this history is very complicated. And we think the complicated story is the more interesting story. So
I think you and I can geek out on this for so long, and that's why I think I lost track of time a little bit here. Thank you so much for joining us, Alexandra, from Connecticut Public Radio.
You.
This is Where We Live. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Tomorrow marks Veterans Day, and there are at least 2 events in our state that will recognize our Native American veterans. The Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Museum and Research Center holds an annual Veterans Powwow, inviting nearly 1,000 Native and non-Native veterans to celebrate. Here to talk about this event and the important history of Native American veterans in our state, joining us on Zoom here, Robert Hayward. He's the Director of Marketing at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center, and Wayne Reels, the Cultural Resources Director at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center. Both are members of the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation. Welcome to Where We Live, guys.
Good morning, Frankie. Thank you for having us.
Good question.
Folks listening can join in on the conversation at 888-720-9677. They can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Robert, can I start with you? Can you tell us about the event?
Yeah. So this will be our 10th annual honoring of the Veterans Powwow. Doors will open at 10 a.m., grand entry at noon. We have just over 18 artisans and craft vendors from all over the Northeast and right down the coast. It's a day that we are able to honor all Native and non-Native veterans. It's our staple event. It's something that we look forward to every year. We also will have a veterans brunch from 10 a.m. to noon. That is free of charge to the first 75 veterans that actually show up. So that's another way that we get to honor them.
Wayne, is there anything in what Robert was just talking about in terms of the format or anything like that that you can point to in terms of the history and being like, wow, that's important that we do that?
Well, Native veterans, Native American veterans throughout the country will be holding these events, powwows and dances. So just to celebrate their service, recognize, and it gives a chance for us to honor and recognize the service of our many warriors. And we go back a long ways when it comes to warriors.
On top of Councilor Gambrell speaking and being honored, Robert, what else can you tell me about some of the folks that will be getting special honors or any kind of dignitaries that will arrive there?
Yeah, we have. I know Wayne can probably speak to that a little bit more.
You go ahead, Wayne.
Well, this year we're focusing on honoring Native Eastern Pequot veterans and Western Pequot veterans. So we have a dance competition dance categories in honor of veterans. Give them a chance to come out and talk a little bit about their service, their time in the service, and family of veterans who have departed also come out and share a little bit about their loved ones and their time in the service and their time in the community.
Robert, anything to add based on what Wayne just said?
No, Wayne hit that one perfectly. It's, again, it's a way for us to really honor our, all of our veterans, and in particular this year we're really focusing in on women with our Native American Heritage Month. We theme it every year, and this year's been particularly for Pequot women. Yeah,
so we're talking about Eastern Pequot Councilor Valerie Gambrell. I can't speak this morning, but we're talking about the counselor and the former U.S. Army sergeant here. Why was it important that you bring her into the fold here and honor her?
Well, again, we're honoring all veterans, and Valerie is very decorated. She's one of the most decorated veterans that we have still living within the Pequot communities. So it's always good. And like she said, she's never been honored before. I think I heard her say that, and that's kind of astounding for all the service that she's done with the armed services and in the Indian community here in Pequot country, too. So every year, even our annual scommittee, we honor all of our veterans that date back all the way to Pequot War, 1637, and every war in between. So just to give them recognition every year for what they've done for their family, their tribe, and their country.
Is there a specific ceremony or event you can point to as being something that's really a hallmark for this year's event?
I think it would have to be the honoring of all veterans. Why this is the Native American Veterans Powwow. Don't get fooled by the title. We honor all Native American veterans and non-Native American veterans for their service. So I think one of the highlights of the event, I believe, would be the honoring of the veterans. We'll be giving them sweetgrass as a way of showing respect for them and all that they've done, and give them time to share a little bit with the public.
Wayne, as I understand it, the elements you have of a powwow usually are the feasting, dancing, and singing. Can you just tell me about the importance of a powwow as a way to kind of get together and commemorate not just the service of Native Americans, but really the tradition?
Well,
and why the powwow factors into that. Thank you. Sorry.
A lot of the today's dances and powwows formed around our dances, and a lot of our dances were war dances. They were dances that we ended up building societies around and having societies to hold them together. But a lot of them are war dances. War dances from all types of areas, all types of war dances were done. The dances themselves were a way for us to connect with the Creator. We never went into battle without getting the blessings of the Creator with our dances. And we also use them to train our youth. Before we take our youth out on the battlefield, they needed, I guess you would say, basic training. And a lot of these war dances that we do, especially the Eastern war dances, a theatrical dance that tells a story, a battle, or the hunt. And movements that you do in the dance reflect the movements that you would do on the battlefield. So it's pretty much almost like a basic training for the younger youth who are yet to go to war. And a lot of these dances that we bring into the arena, they come off of these society war dances that we have and we use today. So the Native American veteran is as it was pre-contact and post-contact, is still part of our festivals, our traditional festivals. Even though today our veterans, mainly the U.S. are in the U.S. services and are respected as warriors, traditional warriors in our arena too, carrying in our flags, picking up our feathers. There is a story of the feather retrieval, which
I wanted to tap into that in terms of the dancing and when this happens. It sounds like a significant moment.
Yes, it is. It's very colorful, very exciting dances to see. Dances, we call them intertribal dances because they come from all over Indian country, all different styles. So if you've never been to a festival dance before, this is a great one to get to. And it basically, these dances, whether they're Veterans Power or not, are mainly to honor and show and celebrate life.
These feathers, I understand that there's significance around the colors because you were talking about how the display is so colorful. It's not these colors of the feathers. There's intentionality behind it.
Well, the feathers have a lot of markings. Feathers to us here in the East, and I believe even through the plains, were significant, and it showed honor in these feathers and the types of feathers that you have had, and how they were decorated. Even today, there's a Red Feather Society of Lakota natives, which is pretty much honors the wounded soldier, as they did before. It's an old tradition of theirs, but it was brought in contemporary forms to recognize the Native American and the U.S. services today. So we still have our feathers of honoring today. We still use them in a traditional form, and they're still respected in that way. They're still earned in that way, or should be earned in that way, in which we decorate our regalias with, in which we decorate our flagstaffs with, and to show honor to our veterans with the feathers. And they are honor gods, who carries these flags in for all of our festivals, what have you, would be our veterans.
And then I just wanted to talk more about this. We kind of alluded to it earlier. It's significant when the feather drops during a dance. There's kind of a special moment, I understand, where there's congregation and trying to make sure that there's unity. Can you just explain that process to me?
Yeah, there's a few different stories of origin outside this region of the down feather, they call it, in the powwow arena during the powwow dance. When a feather falls to the ground, a lot of times it represents a fallen warrior. And sometimes it represents, in some, the lost feather of a warrior and the retrieval of it by warriors. And the courage that it took to retrieve the feather. I think I heard someone mention earlier the honor that we have as warriors, even in battle, from the counting of coup to the retrieval of the feathers. So what would happen if the feather falls, the whole power would stop. Things would come to a halt. We would gather up for veterans to retrieve the feather. A dance ceremony and tobacco ceremony would be performed, and the feather would be retrieved.
Robert, I was looking at a picture.
It's similar
Sorry,
to
go ahead,
like
Wade. Sorry, I
Left
apologize.
Behind. I think it's similar to No Man Left Behind. We have a way of not only retrieving warriors off the battlefield, not only also foes too. So it was a good way for us to honor our warriors.
And is this the retrieval of the feathers? Is this something that happens a lot, or is it something that just if it's something that happens, it's something that you just really jump to?
It can. Most of the time, it doesn't happen, depending on how large the powwow. Because as I stated, a lot of our regalia is I don't want to say decorated, but we have feathers on them that represent certain things. And if you don't tie them down good, they fall off. And once a feather hits the dance arena, things come to a halt. Just to have a feather, to wear feathers, you got to be given a right. You have to be given a right to wear the feathers. You have to know the responsibility of wearing a feather, what it means, what it represents. So it's a really big deal when they fall. And usually the first feather that falls, you'll go through that ceremony, that dance ceremony, tobacco ceremony, and sometimes after that, if a feather falls, they'll go through a tobacco ceremony and retrieve the feather.
Robert, you're going to get my last question here. I understand there's a museum exhibit. I saw a picture of this online where Native veterans from the Pequot War to present day are honored. Can you just tell me a little bit about that history?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something we actually just installed within the past year, and it's such a minor thing that as of now, but we plan to within the next year or two really unravel that into a much bigger monument to honor even ones that are serving today. But for us to be able to honor all the way back from the Pequot War to present day is something that we're really, really proud to do.
I just want to give you guys 15 seconds each because we're running out of time, just to tell me about why people should attend the event and why it's so important. Just 15 seconds if you can each, starting with Wayne.
Well, as it relates in the Bible said there's no greater love than to lay down one's life. I think when we look at our veterans, even the Pequot Veterans Warrior Society, it's warriors who look out for their family, lay down their lives for the welfare of their people. And I think what is going on this weekend is the USA veterans who have done that and who have laid down their lives and sacrificed a lot for this country.
And you briefly, Robert.
Yeah, yes, and to echo
Thank
exactly
you, Wayne.
what
Yep,
said.
you go ahead, Robert. Yep.
It's something that we're always very, very proud to honor every veteran in this country. And as Councilor Gambrell said, we do it for the love of the land. And from day one we continue to hold the land.
Both natives and non-natives, as I understand it. The annual Veterans Powwow takes place this Saturday at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center. More details and the link to register are on our website at ctpublic.org/wherewelive. Thank you guys so much for joining us, Robert and Wayne, to talk about this.
Yes, thank you.
Today's show was produced by Katie Pellico, and man, did Katie do a great job helping us feature the perspective of Native Americans who've served. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Hey, download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. Thank you for listening.